of Steinsaltz Center, the Talmudic Studies Center based in Jerusalem. His mission is to let all the Jewish people to understand the deep knowledge about Talmud for the global Jewish people. He is the main driving force to publish the most popular version of the Talmud, English version and the Hebrew version. His late father, Rabbi Steinsaltz, is also the prominent rabbi in Talmud. By the way, Rabbi Steinsaltz was rated as a scholar in 1,000 years by Times Magazine. They also published a lot of. So, Rabbi Meni, please share with us your Talmud. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
No.
Good morning.
Sorry, the Rabbi Meni is here. He's not on video. He's just on live broadcast.
Good afternoon in your time. Good morning here in Israel. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here in the Solomon Forum 2021. I was asked to speak about one of my favorite topics, which is the Talmud. I would like to start with a point about just an interesting coincidence or divine providence. It depends on your view of things. Today is the 8th of Tevet, which is our 4th month of the year, but it's also represents its historical day that about 2,300 years ago, the first translation, the first complete translation of the 5 books of Moses were translated from Hebrew to Greek. It was done by Ptolemaeus the first in Egypt, king of Alexandria, king of Egypt then. We asked 70 sages to come and translate the language of the Bible, of the Torah, to modern Greek. The obligation and responsibility of making our text, or any text, any sacred text, available to any other language is a responsibility from the first rank. One has the obligation and responsibility to do as much as he can to make all knowledge available to everybody. My father, of blessed memory, always said that the biggest enemy of civilization is not hate. Hate can be dealt with. It's ignoramuity. The fact somebody is ignoramus, somebody has no knowledge of the other, and because of that, as a result of that, no respect, hence wants to create in himself values who are contradictory to human behavior. Anyway, so this is today is a celebration for us, and us who are in business of translation and commentating on text. It's what we do today, we celebrate it. So I want to give a short synopsis in the short time I have to describe what is the Talmud and how it was created. The Talmud is, in most opinions, most Judaic researchers and most Judaic intelligentsia, we believe that this is the most important book of the Jewish people. Yes, we do have the Bible, but the Bible has a topic in it. In a lot of ways, Bible was dictated or was accepted by the whole, which the individual almost had nothing to say. There was no response of the individual. When it comes to the Talmud, our main response, our main concept is that we could explain and discuss the law. When I look at the Talmud, I don't look at it as a religious book. It has religiosity in it, it has religious behavior in it. But in a way, it's not a religious book as much as it's intellectual book. is a book of conversations. In a lot of ways, the reason the book came to become so popular or so essential to the Jewish thinking and to the Jewish learning and the Jewish being was because it was created by the people for the people. Throughout history, throughout time, when we trying to look on text, the text of the law, we need to find a way to interpret it to a modern language. The Talmud is the first key, first understanding of how to do that. So I'm going to give a short synopsis of the way the Talmud was created, and then we'll go to some of the values of it. The Talmud was created between the 5th and 7th century. It was started as application of understanding of the ancient law of Israel, and it was used to interpret the law as I mentioned, in a more modern language. The issue is that once you deal with ancient law, one of the biggest challenges you have is the language, the meaning of words changes with time. The scholars, the sages we call them, had the time, the responsibility to create a system that we can show the way the law was developed. There are thousands of expressions of how to explain the text and how to understand what the text comes to teach you. There's a big difference, I think, and at least in my way. Maybe it's will be a bit maybe odd to some of the Jewish counterparts of this conversation, Israeli counterpart to hear. We expect that everybody will learn, regardless of their religious action, regardless of what they observe religiously. We expect everybody to learn. We expect that everybody that's interested in their culture, understand where the culture developed and what we do and how the things come to be, will greatly appreciate the actual learning of the text. The text gives you the ability to manipulate a conversation, to work on a conversation, to understand the way conversation work or supposed to be. One of the challenges that the scholars of the Talmud had was the fact that the Jewish community, the Judaic community of 2nd, 3rd, 4th century became very separated around the world. Jews were everywhere. We developed, that we travel everywhere. So the code of law, practical code of law, civil code of law, had to automatically change and adapt to the situation around it. So the Talmud, if I may, has 4 values or 4 concepts that differentiate it than any other book, from our perspective. First of all, it dealt with the sanctity of the text, of our text, and interpret them in a way one can understand in the modern language. Second, is referring to a conversation or a dialogue that never ending. The idea behind a sacred text is that usually a sacred text is locked. You read the text, you create a text, whatever it is, divine or spiritual or done by a major scholar, then you lock the text and say, this text is now become sanctum, become holy. I cannot manipulate it, cannot touch it. The Talmud does exactly the opposite. The Talmud says the conversation that we have, the relationship we have with people, have to be, if we learning the Talmud properly, we find out that we continuously have to develop the conversation. Conversation we had 100 years ago is not the same conversation we have today. The same ideas have to be developed all the time. The third value that in a way the Talmud has that I don't know any other books that have it, is in a way the Talmud is the first internet. the first time you have really a web of connection, a web of interlinks in such level, I think exists only in the Talmud. In a typical page of the Talmud, typical one singular page of the Talmud, there are between 20 to 40 links to other parts of the text or to similar text that comes around. It's fascinating. The fascinating idea is that sometimes you have a conversation, you start with a topic of mandatory loans. One of the obligations we have is to give loans to each other. That's part of the way, A, it's helping economy, and two, of a community that a lot of the members, a lot of the major members of the community were dealing with agriculture. They did not have business, did not have income for about 6 months of the year. So the only way they could survive is basically with a system of banking that can provide them with the finance to move from one point to another point. The rabbis and the Talmud and the Torah try to describe how to help each other doing such things. But this system, like any other financial system, is developing throughout the years. So when you're starting a conversation about that, which is, again, it's very limited part, is dealing with the concept of free loans or almost free loans, you get all the way to reaching the concept of family relationship, community relationship, foreign relationship. It's all under it. And you have to find the right way to describe it. Now, today, one of the questions that was asked, and I think it's a good question, how is the Talmud impacting modern life? So obviously, it's part of my business. I'm selling Talmud. So obviously, it's impacting my life in a regular business, and that's what we try to do, as I mentioned, to move as much as we can to transfer the text to any language possible. We even published a book in Chinese, actually published two. One was published upon my father's visitation to China in the early 90s. Published a book with a commentary on our ethics of our father. It's a small tractate of the Talmud. And later we translated a book just in recent years on the essential Talmud. What is the Talmud? Giving the guides, both available online. But one of the biggest benefits of Talmud today on Israeli society, for example, is language. There are a variety of explanation of words or expressions that we use today that are directly taken or being used from the Talmud. For example, if I may, the example is the word teko. The word teko means impasse. It's usually referred to, you hear it a lot in soccer games, when the two teams do not reach any victory and have a draw, 0-0, 1-1, whatever it is, the draw that they get. The word you hear in the news is teko, which is an expression from the Talmud describing a draw, impasse. Once we get to some kind of a civil law, that a variety of people are debating it, a variety of issues, a variety of opinions discussing it, and we don't know what's the result of it, we call it as a teko. We describe it as a legal term, impasse. And we're waiting for maybe other opinions or situation that will change, that will create and make the situation work as possible. The second thing is the Talmud is a great source of behavior code. In the sense of, again, it's not a religious, so to speak, a religious book, and you have to obey it because of religion, because God says so, which is the typical view of reading sanctum text. But the other way around, it's giving you advice based on humanity. Based on your advice on what you do and what you're supposed to do, based on the way you're supposed to behave. It's much more of a guidelines or ethics that everybody has to do. For example, one of the interesting ideas is that there was a wealthy person in Babylon, where they created the Talmud, that every Friday used to buy all the vegetables from the market. and instead of giving them to the poor or to other organizations or the other people, he used to throw them to the river. So they asked him, why are you doing this? I mean, there's poor people in the town, there's people who need your help. Why do you do that? He said, the problem is, there's two problems here. If the merchants will know that nobody buys the product, they will never bring new product to the market because they believe nobody buys it. The other side is, if the people who do not have the means to buy it will know that every week I provide them with the money, with the food that they need, they will never do any effort to work. So I'm killing both the work effort and the marketing effort. Therefore, you have to create a system. That is, again, it's one of those advisors in the Talmud. Another very famous advice that's been around for a while is how to make your investments, which is apparently a very popular notion. I'm not sure it's really working, but the advice is very simple. The Talmud discussed that a person should divide his investment to 3. Right? 3 is a very obvious number. Divide to 3. Third should go to real estate. Third should be kept in cash or equal or equivalent of cash. And third should be put away for dreary days. Now, again, is it a practical investment for our days? I don't know. I'm sure the financial people can take this advice and say, not good advice, bad advice, but the advice is there. Is it a religious advice that everybody has to follow? No, absolutely not. It's a cultural advice, probably from the cultural rabbi who had that experience, who said it was successful for him. The fourth value of the Talmud, which again, one of my favorite, is traditions. Is the idea that we keep something that's being around for, the Talmud itself has been being around for 13, 1400 years, but it's giving us stories and giving us culturally motivated ideas that been for a long time. It's something that concept and legends and lore and cultural and spiritual ideas that can move somebody forward even after all these years. And we take this concept and we play with them. We take this concept and we learn from them. We take these ideas and we manipulate them as much as we can to make the benefit to our own people and for the rest of the world. Part of what the Talmud talks about, which is different than the Torah, for example, is dealing with a lot of the relationship, the Talmud itself, because it was written outside of Israel, outside the land of Israel, it has to deal with the world around. If it's financial relationship, spiritual relationship, conversation between Jewish sages and non-Jewish sages, between local government. The local government of the Jews in Babylon had a period of time where they had almost autonomous relationship with the land. They had their own rules, they can control everything. And that was one of the biggest benefit of the Talmud is that see the relationship going back and forth through the generations with good and bad and more proper relationship, less proper relationship. But in an ideal way, it's not hiding. It doesn't try to keep Judaism in a bubble. Trying to take this text and talk about everything around it. And he brings examples from everything around. And the last, and I think not less important, is the future. What the Talmud teaches us, and I think that is the core of what a text is about, what this book is about, and why it's so important, is that the future is already embedded in this text. The notion of thinking about the future, understanding the problems are not only of the past. When somebody looks at some issues in the Talmud, and the first notion we have is, what the heck am I going to do with this? How is this important to my life today? But the Talmud already brings you the tools of understanding what to do with it. And the Talmud brings you the concept and the values and the tools to develop a system that can move in the challenge of time. I'll give an example. Talmud have a discussion. What happened? Again, it seems bizarre, but I will show you the way this goes. What happened if two people walk in the street and together they find an object? Simple idea. You walk in the street, you find a wallet. You find, I don't know, a beautiful piece of gold. I don't know. You find something together with somebody. And both sides and both people who pick it up, both said, I picked it up first. Now, the Talmud has to deal with this notion of who does it belong to. Is it enough? Is it's enough to decide who owns the property by the first one who sees it? Or maybe it's because the first person who actually picked it up. Now, the Talmud is going on for pages and pages and discussing this in a variety of options. What happened if I saw it first? What happened if my child bought it? What happened if somebody else could have done it? How does that become mine? But there's the question behind it that we ask today is, when somebody has an invention, somebody has an idea, somebody has a concept that they invent, when is that concept belong to him and only him? Or if, let's say, these 5 companies work together on the same idea, who is first? Who has most important? Who has the first obligation? Who we as a consumer have the responsibility to buy from? Is it because of the upbringing? Is it because of what they come from? We have to find a decision that these laws, these ideas of sharing, this idea of dividing the property, how it's done properly today, how we can play with it. And the Talmud, because it's explaining what's the logical assumption behind it, why are we doing what we do, give us the tools to move forward. My father, one of the things he said, which I think is, one of the things he said is that if you look historically, a community who did not learn Talmud never survived in Jewish history. If you look through the oldest Jewish communities around the world, once they stopped learning Talmud, they became insignificant. The Talmud was the core and is the core of all learning. It was the core of all understanding of what we do and how we do it. It became the most important and valuable tool for a person to move forward. Till about 16th century, 17th century, our high-ranking scholars were really judged almost solemnly by the concept of how much Talmud they did. Anyway, so again, the Talmud is the most important book. We believe that is where God, when human being answers back to God and to society around to understand what is the law, what is the word of God, what is the word of understanding of how our culture and customs are moving forward. I thought in the last 5 minutes that I have, I'll open it for questions. Somebody has? Benjamin?
Thank you, Rabbi.